Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hardware News Recap of the Week. In this one, we'll be talking about the new AMD RX 7900 GRE, or the Golden Rabbit Edition. Yes, and we'll also be talking about the first OpenPleb documentation. So Hyte saw the video we did with Wendell a while back in Taipei, and Hyte has now contributed some documentation for developers, just anyone, to program Hyte's devices, which is awesome. So we're going to be talking about that. Additionally, we were in a secret location for the past week. Can't really say anything else about that. You'll see it sometime in the future. And CableMod's got a warranty program for buyers of its 12-volt high power cables. Before that, this video is brought to you by Montec's Metal DT24 base. This two-fan tower cooler keeps a simple black and metal look to match most build aesthetics, and it runs a 6-heat pipe design with 2 towers and 2 fans for higher performance air cooling. The Metal DT24 base can also accommodate taller memory modules because it cuts back the fin stack closest to the first DIMM slot. The Metal DT24 base uses a standard mounting mechanism and is easy to install. Learn more at the link in the description below. First up, if you haven't seen it, we just published a video of our hemi-anechoic chamber build. This is a sound testing chamber. I wanted to take the first part of news here to talk about what we're using it for, because we didn't go into detail about it in the video. So the video shows more of the build process, gets really detailed, very technical, and it actually focuses on the construction side, which is different for us, and was awesome because we had our builder for the chamber on camera to talk about some of the choices, what he was installing, what he was doing. It was very insightful for us, and it was a lot of fun as a video. But as for what we're doing with it, first of all, we have 2 other videos coming up related to that that'll go way more into detail on this, including some of the validation we've done for the noise floor, which is one of the main reasons we implemented this. But to address some concepts for the testing, while you could use such a chamber for very accurate, say, speaker builds or headphone testing, audio devices, basically microphone quality, things like that, our purpose for it is actually for testing the noise produced by devices, or at least that's our initial focus. So it's not for like sort of quote-unquote audiophile testing, but rather it's for a number of other things, such as reducing the time spent collecting the data. We'll no longer have to schedule our lives around a sound test. That means reducing avoidance of certain hours of the day. Historically, the best times to run noise testing would be, say, after 9 p.m. or before 5 a.m. And that's because that's when the world quiets down. And if we're in an environment that isn't the hemi-anechoic chamber we built, we're just in an office environment, then something like a car driving by, even birds chirping out the back window, those types of noises have interrupted our sound testing before when we collect simple noise levels. For example, at 36 dBA result for a fan, you might have birds chirping out the window, and with all the noise of wildlife and things like that, it might be spiking up between 36, the actual sort of result of the product in our noise floor environment of originally 26 dBA, might spike up to something like 40 with background noise. You might have a car drive by, rain on the roof, a plane flying overhead, basically literally any noise that can get through typical construction building materials, that influences the test, and we have to schedule historically around those noises. Now, many of those things aren't a problem. Actually, there was a really heavy rainstorm the other day, and it was hard enough that I could hear it through the roof in the studio here where I'm filming right now, but when I went into the sound chamber, couldn't hear it at all. So that part's number one. It allows us to test whenever. It's a big quality of life improvement for the staff, because now it's like you're at work during your normal hours, you can run the test during your normal hours. You don't have to sort of schedule around it. And additionally, it means that everyone else in the office doesn't have to be quiet when someone's running a sound test, because previously it was a sort of, okay, talk quietly now, someone's in the booth running a test. So that was one of my goals, just sort of make it easier for everyone working here. Now, the next thing, it increases the test quality. So now we have enough test resolution, which we'll talk about as well, where we can make frequency spectrum plots and be pretty confident in them. And that's because we had a third party come out and validate sort of the frequency bounds of the chamber. So the frequency spectrum plot is something we plan to roll out with our ROG Ally review. It's basically different bins of frequency, you can think of it that way, or almost like octaves, where you can see the noise intensity of a given frequency, which allows us to better identify the type of noise that a product produces. So when we tell you the product at 100% fan speed in a sort of normal 26 dBA as in our old testing environment, is 40 dBA. We're not telling you what kind of noise that is. If we then add some subjective context, which we've often done, and say it's a low hum, it's a high-pitched whine, you've got a bit of an idea, but that's subjective phrasing. And what would be better is if we can show a frequency plot and say it's loud in the 4,000 hertz range, for example, whereas maybe a better designed fan might be a more even distribution of frequency at the lower end. The new noise floor I'm not going to get into, but that's another big thing. We'll talk about what that is in our upcoming data-driven video. But it is so much lower that we had to buy specialized equipment with a microphone that has an ultra-low noise floor to even pick up the noise in that room. And having a lower noise floor means that we can include additional types of tests on, say, cases that have special panels. So if Be Quiet ships a case that has a sound deadening panel on it, historically we've really had no way to prove whether what they're saying is BS or is actually helpful, because we didn't collect the type of noise, the frequency, and we also didn't have the resolution to get down to that noise floor so we could scale a fan or scale the noise the case the product is producing to then see how that panel, if we remove it, subtract it, from the case and replace it with a normal one, how that affects the result. Now, this also allows us to increase our testing distance, so we're moving to a more standard 1 meter to comply with ISO standards for most tests. We're still going to keep our standardized 20 inches for a few things. One of those is going to be during the transition period where we map the results in the chamber to our old results, and another reason would be something like a handheld device. We're maintaining a shorter distance just because although 1 meter is the sort of global standard for measuring noise produced by, say, a computer, you're not going to be holding a handheld like this while you're playing games. So we are still keeping in mind the reality of it, and we're adjusting as needed. This will also allow us to collect more over time data without having to filter it for other building noises, like, say, a crow landing on the roof. That's something that we've had to do in the past. So now we'll be able to run a pre-built and run a thermal load as well. This is super cool because since we have such specialized AC handling on this thing, we could run AC. Yes, it will increase the noise floor a little bit, but compared to previously where it invalidates any opportunity to even test, it's a big improvement. So we can run a pre-built, have the AC going if we want to thermally load it, and that will allow us to see the fan curve and plot the noise over time. This would also work great for video cards. Now, we've shown these types of plots in the past, but it's always been a big challenge to run them and collect meaningful data. Now we can do a much better job of that because since the noise floor is lower, it allows us to do things like turn on the AC and not affect the baseline noise too much, so we can still collect useful data. And finally, the metal wedges on the chamber are great because someone was asking in the comments about why not the more typical foam. So Dave in the video talks about that a little bit, but one of the other reasons we didn't get into too much is because they are, first of all, they're safer, metal wedges, as opposed to some certain types of foam wedges that are used in chambers. But secondly, safer for humans, that is. But secondly, the metal wedges last effectively forever. So a lot of the common foams that are used in these chambers have a life cycle, and their manufacturers will tell you this, of about 7 years where they start degrading. And if someone bumps into the wedge, that accelerates that significantly. So you then end up with, as people bump into the wedges moving around the chamber, you're not only creating that sort of fine foam dust powder in the air, but you also are deteriorating the chamber walls itself because that foam, it doesn't last forever. Having the metal encasing helps with not only the noise, as we talked about in the video, but also with protecting the investment for as long as I'm going to be using it. So anyway, that's the basics of the chamber and what we're using it for. Again, you could use it for headphones, things like that. Maybe we'll go that direction in the future. We're not really much into audio here like that right now. We're more interested in the noise stuff makes, and this is going to massively overhaul our testing capabilities for things like CPU coolers, for example, because now, if you remember just recently, we talked about a noise that the deep cool fans were making. We even attempted to isolate that noise for the Assassin 4, and all of that was done just with Premiere, but if we had already rolled out this chamber, we would be able to much better convey to you all what we mean, and the importance of that is you can then look at the noise sample, listen to it, and look at the frequency plot as we educate everyone on how to read those. And you can come to your own decision of, well, you know what, I don't really care about that type of noise, or you do, rather than hearing us subjectively say it's whiny, and then depending on your personality, that either greatly concerns you and you immediately eliminate the product from your consideration when perhaps our characterization of whiny is not the same as yours, or it doesn't really matter to you, you buy it, and then you're like, damn it, I should have listened to them, but I didn't know what they meant. So that's the goal with the chamber, and as a reminder, we have code CHAMBER on store.gamersaccess.net, so you can get 10% off of your purchases with us while the code is active. That'll give you 10% off anything, any item on the store, and just type in chamber at checkout. All right, first story is the OpenPleb initiative getting some documentation. This comes from Hyte. So in the time since meeting with Wendell from Level 1 Techs in a Taipei cafe and publishing that video, we've had some updates. We've had a lot of people reach out, companies that is, asking for participation and what they need to do. We basically told all of them, well, what you need to do is make some documentation about how to access and write software for your devices. You don't have to give away source code. You don't have to give away special trade secret information. Literally just telling us how to transact bytes between a controller. That's kind of what we're looking for. It can all be reverse engineered. So Hyte has done us sort of a, they've set the standard for the other companies who are asking, what can we do? This is the answer. So as a quick reminder, this isn't just about RGB, and we'll link the OpenPleb video below. If you haven't seen it, you don't know what we're talking about. But this is also about opening up things like sensor clusters. So the whole initiative is just to get companies on the same page to, there's a couple things. There's a pledge to commit documentation for managing their devices. So as the companies retire those devices from their catalogs, users can still get updates, important software updates from the community if it's been written how to do those. And additionally, it's OpenPleb is asking for a commitment from the companies to effectively not sue each other if one of them, say, likes the pinout of another and uses it, and then says, our pinout is Corsair whatever compatible or Lianli whatever compatible. We're saying, hey, if you use each other's stuff, we just want a pledge here that everyone is okay with it. The reason for that is because it's the best for the actual hardware ecosystem. All right, so Hyte tweeted out its support of the OpenPleb initiative. It has released documentation under the GNU General Public License version 2, and the company followed all of this up with its Hyte CNVS protocol document version 1.01. This details how to interact with the controllers for programming. The documentation includes the streaming command bytes, LED layout, the individual bytes for LEDs 1 through 50, and USB serial information for updates and versioning. OpenRGB's developer posted a video talking about this documentation and the OpenPleb initiative as well, and we'd encourage you to watch it. As an example for a larger endgame for this type of initiative, again, motherboard sensor clusters are really the prize here, because just as if you had the Asus motherboards that had melting XMD CPUs in them that we looked at previously, the controllers Asus uses on those could prevent all those problems if only they had programmed the functionality in or opened it up for the users to do something with. But because Asus isn't really leveraging those controllers properly or fully, they just end up a lot less useful than they could be. And so providing some documentation like that to the community rather than forcing people to reverse engineer it, which is painful, but you get to the same place anyway, just with a lot more hate for what you're doing, that would allow for, say, software that could better inform consumers about the characteristics of the product outside of just the existing hardware info sensor reports that you get. Up next, CableMod sent out an unsolicited email to its customers. We obtained this from a viewer, then confirmed it with CableMod, and the email details CableMod's early adopter program. And it starts by addressing some of the CableMod cable failures that have been posted online recently. CableMod has had kind of an inverse problem to NVIDIA's original adapters. The NVIDIA adapters were so tight that it wasn't necessarily clear if the connector was completely seated. CableMods have been on the looser side of this and are therefore easier to unseat. And CableMod wrote the following, quote, behind the scenes, we've been working behind the scenes, okay, on a new revision of our angled adapters. dubbed version 1.1. These adapters have the exact same dimensions as our original V1 adapters. CableMod noted to us that its failures are still under or at most around 0.1%. This is a number we can't independently confirm, but something we were able to independently confirm was that CableMod's policy has been for replacing GPUs entirely if they experience any issues with the adapter, not just the cables. And that is even if the video card manufacturer, the board partner, declines the warranty replacement relating to an adapter melting in the socket, for example. So CableMod will replace the whole card and the actual cable. As for improvements to the cables that CableMod's rolling out, they include these. It says CEM 5.1. With the new CEM 5.1 standard in place, version 1.1 adapters will include a new CEM 5.1 female connector. Connector tightness. As Jay's 2 cents noticed quite early on, the main thing that could be improved is how tightly the adapter connects to the GPU. CableMod says the current version 1 does have some wiggle room, which could cause the connector to come loose during the cable management process. They say our adapter has a lot more pull force on it during cable management compared to our 12-volt high-power cables. And so we've adjusted our terminals to have a tighter and more sturdy connection that should prevent it from coming loose. While the type of terminal didn't make a significant difference in our testing, the tightness could certainly be improved. This will result in the adapter being harder to both plug in and remove, but we feel this is an acceptable trade-off. And finally, they said connector wiggle. Some users have commented on how the male connector on the adapter wiggles on the PCB itself. While this didn't affect performance in CableMod's test, they say many users were concerned about it, and version 1.1 addresses this. CableMod also told users that it will be offering a replacement program, and it said this, quote, "We've been spending a lot of time interacting with the hardware community since this adapter launch. Frankly, we're extremely grateful for the number of people that supported us by purchasing an adapter for their systems. However, some users have expressed that they would feel more safe if they instead used a direct replacement cable, ideally a 90-degree one, for their systems due to the fact that there are fewer resistance points connection-wise. We also realize that everyone that supported us by purchasing a V1 adapter is probably wondering how they could get a 1.1 revision, and if there would be any sort of discount extended to early adopters. CableMod says customers who purchased an Angle adapter will receive a coupon code valid on their stores that can be used on a CableMod 12-volt high-power 90-degree cable, which is available today, a small form factor 12-volt high-power 90-degree cable also available now, or its future-looking 12-volt high-power angled adapter 1.1 or CableMod Pro 12-volt high-power 90-degree cable. CableMod notes that it's going to roll this out on August 1st and send customers, existing customers, codes. We understand you don't have to opt in; they're just going to send it. As for our thoughts, 12-volt high-power has been a complete clusterfuck of a rollout ever since the beginning. We've talked about it a number of times now, but one of the issues with rolling out a new standard is the standards organization designing this with contributions from all of the partners who are sort of the major players in the industry, like NVIDIA, Intel, so forth. It needs to account for multiple types of laziness, error, oversight, cost savings, all of these things. And an example of that would be partners who maybe haven't done full testing or have different standards for the sort of tightness of the connector. Another might be the materials of the housing for the connector. There should be a really hard and clear spec for you need to use this type of plastic or better to have ratings for this type of temperature or less. And there also needs to be something accounting for possible user error. So all of these things have to be factored in for a new design, and 12-volt high power didn't fully adequately account for that because you look at it, there haven't been nearly as many complaints since the beginning about the native adapters, but CableMod's had sort of the most instances lately that have been posted online in any sort of public way. That much is undeniable. You go to their subreddit, and they were there sometimes multiple times a day for a little while. And that, we think, has to do with some of the flexibility in the design, where it sounds like they've really identified it as sort of the looseness of the connector, which makes sense. If it's working its way out a little bit, that would certainly be even more of a design oversight if it's not actually tight enough to really stay in there. So whatever the case may be, the new 12-volt 2x6 standard should help with a lot of this because it's truncating those sense pins. So as it starts to unseat, if it unseats at all, you will lose connection. Or if the user hasn't plugged it in all the way, or if some sort of freak vibration through the chassis, it works its way loose, whatever, losing contact with those sense pins earlier will protect the user, the cable, prevent burning GPUs, all these problems. So that should help. But anyway, right now the updates on CableMod's side And our understanding is they have some more updates coming as well, but we'll talk about those more once we have them. Up next, AMD launched a brand new RDNA 3 GPU at the China Joy Gaming Expo in Shanghai. It's called the Radeon RX 7900 GRE. This stands for the Golden Rabbit Edition, and it's primarily a China launch, but it will be available globally through system integrators. And this isn't just a paper launch because German retailer Memory PC has already had it available. Now for specs, it's reasonably close to the 7900 XT with 80 CUs, it has 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM, and the card's power limit is lower. It's at 260 watts, so that's 55 watts less than the 7900 XT, and it'll likely lower the overall performance more than the missing CUs and the memory reduction alone. The MSRP for the 7900 GRE is $650 US, which is a little over $100 cheaper than the cheapest 7900 XTs available at the time of writing. If it's ever available standalone in the US, that pricing could make it interesting. AMD has had a completely vacant mid-range for this current lineup, where it's basically just an RX 6800 if you can still get them, or a 6800 XT. So this is the cheapest thing, other than, if you count it, the 7600 that AMD's put out. It's had that massive between 200 and whatever, 50, whatever it is, and in the 700s plus, there's nothing. AMD's working with PowerColor, Sapphire, and XFX for this one, but it's also making some reference models. We saw one posted in a review from XP Review. The review is written in Chinese, but there are some benchmark charts. Numbers are universal language, and they show the 700 XT at 20 to 30% faster than the new GRE. We're trying to secure a sample ourselves, so look out for that if we're able to benchmark it. If you have one, email tips@gamersnexus.net. Somewhat related to that is a seeming change in AMD's plans for the Ryzen 5 7500F that we reported on in, I think it was the last news episode, where AMD was planning to have that be a limited rollout to China only, but it looks like the company has maybe switched its plans because we noticed that that CPU is starting to pop up through SI system integrators globally, not just in China. So it is technically available, similar to the way the GRE is rolling out. Now, if you wanted the 7500F individually, it's on AliExpress, just then you're gonna have to wait forever to get it. Pricing has the 7500F at about $45 cheaper than the 7600. Biggest difference is the 7600 comes with Starfield, which you can enjoy a few months after launch when they patch all the bugs. As usual, AMD's tactics are sort of an enigma wrapped in a mystery here. It's taken a while to get the mid-range and the low end to roll out. It certainly feels right now like some of these silicon companies are taking any opportunity available to slow the rollout of more affordable things and keep pushing that higher average selling price, which benefits the shareholders, or at least sells more sort of interest and confidence to them by increasing ASP. But anyway, next story. This one's a rumor. A new post by Copite7Kimi on Twitter, or X, depending on your susceptibility to viral marketing, claims that NVIDIA has dropped its plans for a 4090 Ti. Quote, "I'm afraid there won't be a 4090 Ti anymore. Some low-grade 8103 and 8106 chips will be other versions of 4070s and 4060s. It's just kind of funny seeing how an unreleased product, it may not even be real, is sort of announced through leaks and then killed through leaks just as quickly. But we're reporting on it nonetheless because the last time we did talk about this, it was related to the massive Founders Edition cooler leaks, and those were really interesting. There were multiple of them. It appears to have been a real product at some point, maybe, but either way, whether it's a canceled design or a mock-up that just didn't make it through prototyping, that's why it kind of became news. At this point, it's whatever. We've heard enough about the alleged 4090 Ti being real and not real. It's like Schrodinger's GPU. So we're gonna move on to a different rumor. This one's also from Copite7Kimi, who followed up the original tweet, said, combined with multiple sources, they can confirm the gaming flagship of 8 and X will have a 512-bit memory interface. And we don't know if that's gonna be true, and honestly, it doesn't really matter until it is. So let's just only use this as a launching point to talk about what that would mean if it were to become true. It was sort of a hypothetical. So for reference, both the 3090 Ti and the 4090 have 384-bit memory buses. So 512 would be exceedingly wide for a gaming card. In fact, the last NVIDIA gaming card we could find with a 512-bit bus was the GeForce GTX 285 from 2008, a time when you could expect weird CG art on every single video card. Based on that rumor, though, of 512, the bus would mean the next-gen flagship would have maybe a 24GB GDDR7 capacity or 32 gigabytes of G6X or double-stacked 6W. It could conceivably be any of these, but with 32 gigabytes of GDDR6X, that seems unlikely to us because then NVIDIA would probably be moving back to the clamshell design where they have memory modules on both the front and the back of the PCB, which is just thermally challenging to cool. So anyway, NVIDIA has a pretty strong technical marketing push it's made for higher cache and reducing the bus width. And so this would be a big divergence from that path they've been on. We talked about NVIDIA's side of the story and presented it prior to the, I think it was the 4060 Ti launch when we did the news roundup, the news coverage of that set of cards. And then when we benchmarked it, we said, nope, didn't work. But thanks for trying to explain your position, NVIDIA. So a flagship with a super wide bus would be a reversal from that approach by NVIDIA. One other option is that they might be repurposing something like a data center die. Up next, AMD has launched its first ever CPU with 3D V-Cache for the mobile market. It's called the 7945HX3D. That's a hell of a name. We're sure people at Intel right now are calling meetings about future meetings so they can discuss the implications of having multiple letters and a lot of numbers in one product name and what they might need to do to respond. This CPU is supposed to come in the ROG Strix Scar 17X3D laptop first. The 7945HX3D has 16 cores, 128 megabytes of L3 cache, boosts up to 5.4 gigahertz on the non-X3D CCD, and has a configurable 55 to 75 watt TDP. It's interesting to us that AMD chose the base 16-core X3D CPU rather than an 8-core here, considering there are some real consistency hurdles with game performance on dual CCD parts, as we've shown in our benchmarks with, say, the 7950X3D. Also, 55 to 75 watts is a relatively small power budget to handle 16 cores and the I/O die, even for mobile. It'll be imperative for users to adhere to AMD's guidance on how to run the 7950X3D that we covered in the original review. It was somewhat complicated to get it to really work properly. And the 7950X3D is part of a niche market as it stands on desktop, and even more so on laptops. As for the laptop itself, it's similar to other Asus Scar models currently on the market with an NVIDIA 4090, and big air quotes there, and Thermal Grizzly Conducta Not Extreme liquid metal for the TIM. We actually use Asus Scar laptops, we bought them ourselves, for our mobile editing stations when we're traveling, but we use Intel ones only. And that's because we need quick sync. It really accelerates our rendering and scrubbing process. So we've used the Scars. They seem to be, well, depending on which one you get, they seem to be some of the better high-end models, but thermals become the main problem. We had to send a few 4090 laptops back when we were trying them out. And the Scars were one of the ones that remained after we filtered out the ones that were thermally obnoxious. So anyway, this is the first of the X3Ds for mobile, except XMG did have a desktop replacement style laptop at one point that had, I think it was a 5800 X3D in it. While we're on the topic of Asus, the company announced a new small form factor pre-built gaming PC intuitively named the ROG G22CH. It's only 10.7 liters in volume, so slightly smaller than the Fractal Terra, and it's 11.4 liters. That's depending on how you count the feet on the Terra. But it's in a narrower and taller package. Asus's pre-built has a 13900K, 32 gigabytes of DDR5, some M.2 SSDs, and what they say is, quote, up to an RTX 40 series graphics card. Weirdly vague language, but okay. Looking at the actual product page, drilling down into it, you eventually learn it's a 4070. Despite Asus's claims of upgradability for the small form factor PC, it looks like you won't be able to change much. The power supply, the cooler, and the motherboard are all, at least appear to be proprietary. The parts that aren't don't look like they have much room for flexibility either. The 3900KF is top of the line, so you're limited on cooling. The RAM is on SODIMMs. And the GPU area only supports cards roughly 2 slots in size. There aren't any 2-slot cards more powerful than a 4070 anyway, so you're already stuck there. For CPU cooling, it's available with either air or liquid cooling. The liquid version has a custom CLC that takes up the top portion of the case, exhausting straight out of the vented top. The Air version has 2 radial fans that'll likely blow up through a fin stack located in the same top area. Either way, it pulls air in through the ventilated side panels, unless you pick the tempered glass version, that is. There's a lot of industry momentum towards these smaller form factor boxes lately, or just ITX cases, which is why we're really excited about getting into ITX case reviews. The Phetdara is almost done now. And that means there's a lot more room for companies to make massive mistakes or to really shine with some ingenuity. And Asus here, for example, could have expanded the width a little bit to accommodate 3-slot GPUs. If they'd pushed just a little more, that would have really opened up the options. But this is probably one we'll buy to review. We haven't looked at an Asus pre-built in a while, and the last one was a disaster, from what I remember. So maybe we'll give this one a shot. Anyway, that's it for hardware news. Thanks for watching as always. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to support us directly, or patreon.com/gamersnexus, and use code CHAMBER on the store for 10% off while it's active, and that will support us as we start using the sound chamber and work on recouping that massive investment. But it was worth it already. It's really excited me to work on doing the methodological studies for our new sound testing. I'm excited to keep using it. So anyway, check back for that. Go watch that video if you haven't seen it, and we'll see you all next time.